Good evening. I'm Todd Whipke, the chair of the Emeriti group at UCSC that presents the Emeriti lecture. This is the 13th lecture in the series. The series was founded in 2003 by Professor Joseph Bennett of chemistry to feature the research of our retired, in quotes, faculty, and to make a substantial contribution to the intellectual environment of the campus and community. I'd like to thank the Chancellor's Office for sponsoring the lecture and the refreshments afterwards, and especially Kristen Palma and Rebecca Alvarez of Special Events Office for helping organize this and the publicity for it. And a special thanks goes to Mr. Craig Hobbs, who volunteered his time to help with the digital media that went into part of the presentation tonight that you'll probably recognize. This series is being recorded for posterity and webcasts, podcasts, so please take this opportunity to turn off your cell phone so that it doesn't interrupt it and doesn't interfere with the wireless mic and so on. Tonight's Emeriti lecture is being given by Professor Emeritus Todd Newberry of the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology program. His research is focused on marine biology and invertebrate zoology. He earned his BA degree in biology from Princeton and his PhD in biology from Stanford. He joined UCSC as a founding faculty member. That would be 1965, the beginning of the campus. And he retired 30 years later, 1995. He received the Distinguished Teaching Award in 1987. And after his retirement, he shifted back to his lifelong interest in birding. He said he didn't have the guts to make it a career, but as soon as he had the opportunity, he switched to that activity again by giving classes on birds, leading bird trips. How many here have been on one of his bird trips? Hold up your hand. Okay. When I invited him to give this lecture, he said, "Oh, why don't I just lead trips for the group?" I said, "It's not really the same." So, and he also has written about birding, and in 2005, he published The Ardent Birder, the cover of which is shown here, and the interesting thing is the bird has the binoculars. And this was the first of the many books on birding to focus on the bird watcher as much as the birds. On the cover of the book, Jonathan Franzen writes, it's probably too small or off the screen for you to read, "The Ardent Birder is a work of extraordinary sympathy between birder and bird, between expert and non-expert, between author and illustrator, and an elegant new proof of this equation: science plus love equal wisdom." Tonight, we're in for a treat as he shares that wisdom in this 13th Emeriti lecture entitled Some Dilemmas for Birdwatchers. Please join me in welcoming Professor Todd Newberry.
Thank you, Todd, for those nice words. And thanks to Rebecca Alvarez and Jeff Rockwell for their organizational work and publicity, and to Dave Morrison up there in the backroom booth for making it all happen tonight in sound and lights. Now it's up to me to provide supply the reason for all this and for your $3 parking fee. To answer things right away, we'll have a quiz. This is a 2-question quiz. First question is, why are the house lights on full? It's to keep you alert. And the second is, why is this piano here on the stage? And the reason is that it seemed to me to make the stage look less imposing. Tonight, I'm going to risk repeating many things I've told many of you on bird walks, or in a book here or an essay there. And so the Arboretum birders among you may want to leave fast and try to get your $3 back. And good luck. But if poor memory or sheer stamina or insomnia persuades you to stay on, I have an hour of thoughts I would like to share with you, as they say in Marin. A few pictures to look at that may help you see birds in fresh ways. And finally, some recordings that, even after years of listening to them, leave me wondering what songbirds themselves actually hear compared to what we hear when they sing. So let me start with a passage from Michel de Montaigne's essay on cannibals, of all things. Almost 5 centuries ago, Montaigne wrote, "Clever people observe more things, and more curiously, but they interpret them. And to lend weight and conviction to their interpretation, they cannot help altering history a little. They never show you things as they are, but bend and distinguish them according to the way they have seen them. And to give credence to their judgment and to attract you to it, they're prone to add something to their matter, to stretch it out, to amplify it." When we do science with its ways of critically testing our assertions, or at least reckoning our confidence in them, we try to guard against this tendency that Montaigne describes to let our interpretations get the better of us. But birdwatching is not a method, not an explanation. It belongs to our personal voyages of discovery, including the discovery of other creatures' lives. It is full of interpretations, analogies, metaphors, narratives, and the other threads by which we sew together the fabric of our world. And so birdwatching, for all its rigor, its moments of keen focus, and for many of it, its real seriousness as a voyage of discovery, birdwatching, even among friends, is a personal affair. The more we go birding, and the more we get to know birds, the more we get to know ourselves. As Charles Hartshorne said, when we hear a bird sing, life touches life. Tonight, I'd like to explore a few dilemmas, if that's not too fretful a word. If not dilemmas, then at least challenges that seem to shape my days in the field. Montaigne urges us to beware of interpretations. In birdwatching, even that customary first step of identifying the bird is an act of interpretation and an expression of our point of view. We scrutinize a bird's plumage and posture and behavior, and we interpret our observations into an identification. It's a robin. Robins present us with a lot of traits, blatant and subtle, that identify them for us and for other robins, even identify them individually, the way we get to know one another. But sometimes we cut our own inventory short. That big red breast and that perky way of standing, the robin for sure. We glance and go, and sometimes in our haste, we go awry. For example, decoys fool me more often than they fool ducks. A white trash bag in a tree at Scott Creek was not, as I had announced to the group with such confidence, a snowy egret. Nor was the broken off stump a barn owl. Weather vanes sometimes look to me like falcons. Old cow pies become larks. 4 twists of blue tape in a pasture on a pasture fence were not 4 mountain bluebirds, again after I had identified them aloud. My friend Anna Kopetoff and I had almost identified 2 wrens hopping on a sun-dappled log when they twitched in unison. They were the ears of a deer lying behind the log. So from embarrassing experience, I can tell you that just the interpretive act of calling a bird by its name invites that awful question, how do you know? Inside our brains, all observations are interpretations. They are all puzzles that we've pieced together. The light in our eyes becomes an image only in the back of our head. But in a more workaday way, we can try to tell our interpretations from our observations. How can we tell them apart? As you know, I like to tell the story of one of my teachers, Cornelis van Niel, and how he knew the difference. He said that if he made an assertion and someone asked him, and how do you know? If it was an observation, he would start to point. But if it was an interpretation, he would start to sweat. Birdwatching, leisurely as it may be, is full of this kind of sweat, starting with just naming the bird. As a friend occasionally reminds me, we sweat for names that, after all, the birds themselves don't even know they have. But trying to identify a bird, to put a name, to pin a name on those feathers, has, it seems to me, a real value. Because at its best, our effort to identify that bird, even for a moment, even if we just glance and go, focuses our attention on it. Exactly what do we see? Just what do we hear? Montaigne hovers. For that moment, we are explorers. There are worse ways to spend a moment. What do we birdwatchers do with our little triumphs of identification? Famously, we make lists of them. Sometimes these lists of names really do add something to the fund of knowledge about the natural world, at least locally. But for the most part, making our lists, bird by bird, is as personal as an exercise as a golfer writing down his score, hole by hole. Achievements though they may be for us, our bird lists are entirely private ones. Who else cares? Like golf scores, they make my patient listener's mind wander. On the other hand, if her mind doesn't wander after all, she must truly love me. Again, though, just as trying to identify a bird redeems itself as an act of focus and discovery, so also even a mundane bird list may carry a significance that leaves golf scores behind. There are, it seems to me, distinct stages in becoming familiar with any kind of bird. There is first the feat of identification, with that red breast and that song, cheery up, cheerio, it must be a robin. If this is the first one we have ever identified, and plenty of visitors from foreign shores have had this experience here, just as we did when we were young, the identification has a kind of singular quality. When I was young and just starting to look at birds and listen to them, my encounters with them, of course, lacked connections, lacked context. They were momentary triumphs, yes, but none more notable than another, except for the pleasure of the occasion itself. A rare bird or a common one, that was lost on me. Why were my birding pals back then so excited about this bird, but so casual about that one? Almost all the birds I identified were equally new to me, and so they were still rare in my own life. But then, when you next see or hear a robin, you remember having encountered one before. The next robin evokes memories. Gardens, dawn, spring, clumsier efforts, a growing confidence. And so one's lifelong list of birds becomes an almanac of encounters, and so of recollections. Memories richer for the richness of each one of them. My life list of birds includes a lot more than names. It stretches my memory back to boarding school. The bird list as autobiography, the birdwatcher as Proust. Recently, I put it this way. Since my more enduring bird lists record memorable encounters, and since I keep my best memories in my heart, I keep trying to deepen the sense of intimacy with nature that comes over me now and then during field days. Thoreau told us not to rush into nature, to let it come to us. Birding is not about drive up, wow, drive away vista points. In a birdie place, I slow down, pause, stand still, listen for tiny creatures, listen to the air. Big animals that we are, we make wakes of disturbance wherever we go. The best hunters and trackers speak of diminishing the wake of their disturbance and enlarging the wake of their awareness. We birders can do this. We can stand very still and silent and let a habitat recover from the shock of our arrival. Like a canoe that glides to a rest, we let our wake of disturbance close in around us. Soon our awareness spreads beyond our disturbance. It is as though a curtain were rising and a play that we had interrupted were resuming. By now, we have identified the birds we noticed. They are the characters in the play. And now a new dilemma arises, expressed maybe by the blunt question, so what? Let's seek some guidance again. The extraordinary still life painter of Bologna, Giorgio Morandi, declared, "To achieve understanding, it is necessary not to see many things, but to look hard at what you do see." And his counsel leads us naturally to Proust's famous statement, "The true voyage of discovery consists not in seeing new lands, but in having new eyes." Yes, but how? How can we make this happen when we go birding? How can we look hard and see with new eyes? We look at art through the questions we ask. So also with nature. And crucially, we can ask questions in the field whose answers do not start with that treacherous word, maybe. The best way to avoid maybe answers is to avoid answers that depend on narrative words. But what questions can we ask that don't have words in their answers? Well, we can ask about what a bird looks like or sounds like, and we can sketch our answer, sketch even the pitch and rhythm of its sounds. We can ask how many birds we have seen, and for an answer, we can count them. We can ask about their distribution and map it. And we can ask about a bird's behavior and wordlessly diagram it. For me, that's about it. That about exhausts the choices of what sorts of questions we can ask unless we want to make up stories. And when we do that, when we make up stories, Montaigne frowns. But within these limits, what a treasure trove of questions and answers. This effort to observe without narration, this effort to avoid the maybes of verbal descriptions, often helps us notice things about a bird that we never noticed before. For Proust, noticing was the consummate skill. So every field day, I try to take some time simply to notice something about some bird that I have never noticed before. With birds I have never met before, of course, noticing something new is a cinch. But it is also surprisingly easy, even with birds we know well. The feisty blackbirds at Kelly's Bakery, for example. The male's glaring eye and iridescent plumage now. The female's subtle shades of charcoal brown. The way their feathers form a birdie umbrella in the rain. I simply pause a while and focus and try to notice. If I'm lucky, I come away wordlessly. Now I'd like to place my noticing in a larger context. I'd like to advocate a metaphor about words in their habitats. Interpretations run rampant. Metaphors and analogies don't start with maybe, they start with as if, and so they alter our very stance toward our world. If you've been on a bird walk with me lately, you know I like to think of a natural habitat as a restaurant. Its creatures, birds among them, are its customers, and they eat almost everything on the restaurant's menu, including other customers. Not only big birds like hawks do, but so do little ones, garden birds, our feathered friends. Many of them are killing machines. Last spring in the Arboretum, some of us watched as a little house finch made its first flight from the nest. Up, up, fluttering over the greenhouses, climbing into the sunshine. With that, a scrub jay that had been watching the little bird, too, launched itself like a missile and nailed that little bird out of the sky. We were appalled. But a little while later, we were merely charmed when we watched a flycatcher catch flies. Of course, as much for those flies as for that finch, those were fatal encounters. Why did we react so differently to fly and finch? Sometimes a kiss is just a kiss, but killing is killing. In his poem, Thrushes, Ted Hughes put it this way: terrifying are the attent, sleek thrushes on the lawn. More coiled steel than living. A poised, dark, deadly eye, those delicate legs triggered to stirrings beyond sense. With a start, a bounce, a stab, they overtake the instant and drag out some writhing thing. No indolent procrastinations, no yawning states, no sighs and head scratchings, nothing but bounce and stab and a ravening second. Hughes makes me see thrushes with new eyes. A garden is a green restaurant, but it's patronized by diminutive killers. And now the very tininess of many songbirds will loom large in the rest of my remarks. Here are some comparisons to make my point about their size. I weigh about 160 pounds, about 2,500 ounces. A robin weighs about 3 ounces. It would take 800 robins to equal my weight. A sparrow weighs less than an ounce. A small wren about half an ounce. A hummingbird a tenth of an ounce. It takes 3,000 sparrows or 5,000 wrens to make my weight. It takes 25,000 hummingbirds. Weight is one measure of size, so is standing height. We are big and we are tall. Standing, we are about 25 times as tall as a standing sparrow. That sparrow looks up at us the way we look up at a 12-story building. Imagine such a tower advancing on you and then even pointing at you. No wonder birds scatter when we arrive. It's not just that robins and wrens are so small. It is also that we are so big. What about their pace of life? The way a bird's body works, tiny means intense, lest it lose the heat it needs to run its chemistry. For an extreme example, let's compare ourselves to hummingbirds. An active hummingbird breathes 250 times a minute. When the bird is active, its heart beats upward of 1,000 times a minute. To fuel its machinery, it must consume 2 or 3 times its weight daily in nectar and insects. If I lived at a hummingbird's pace, I would burn up some 10,000 calories every hour. Calvin Simons, just have to take a drink at that, just a minute. Calvin Simons has calculated that to hold my own at a hummingbird's pace, I would have to down more than 100 double hot fudge sundaes during every day of frantic bar hopping. Especially frantic because each bar, were it like a flower blossom, would serve only one such treat before it closed for the day. Still, at 1/10 of an ounce, a hummingbird weighs so little that its huge diet amounts daily to only 12 calories. But wait, the average little flower blossom's nectar provides only about 1,000th of a calorie, enough to sustain a flying hummingbird for scarcely 10 seconds. So for hummers, those big nectar-rich blossoms in the arboretum are vital. At night or during cold storms, hummingbirds must let their metabolic rate plummet. They go torpid to survive. At night, you can pluck a hummingbird off a twig like a soft acorn. As the figures I just threw at you suggest, songbirds come in many sizes. That robin weighs 3 times as much as most sparrows, 5 or 6 times as much as a wren. That robin weighs a full 30 times more than a hummingbird. Small and charming they all are, but at all the same size they are not. Nor are they all feathered friends with each other. By pausing to stop, look, and listen, we are bound to notice these things. Notice what we have, of course, seen all along, but we now begin to see with new eyes. But no matter how hard we look or how hard we listen, there are some things about little birds we cannot see in the field. And some parts of their calls and songs we cannot hear out there. For the most part, we cannot see much of a bird's body inside its feathers. I like to think of a songbird's body as like a professor's, invisible inside some garish academic robes. Or better yet, think of a bird as wearing a parka, and when we look at the bird, we see mostly its parka. The marvelous New England naturalist Bernd Heinrich recently wrote a book about how some animals survive the winter there. One of these animals is the golden-crowned kinglet, and here's a picture of one. A creature about the size of a small wren. They're common enough around here, but they tend to stay up high in the redwoods. But their close relative, the Ruby-Crowned Kinglet, is as tiny, and they abound in trees and bushes all over the campus all winter. One day, Heinrich found a dead kinglet, and after doing some heat loss measurements, he plucked it naked to compare these matters again without its feathery insulation. And inside its parka, this is what Heinrich found and drew. My gosh. The bird's naked body looks as if it just hatched. The rest is feathers. Its hind body stops above its legs like a frog's. Its tail feathers begin far forward in the small of its back. We see the immense overcoat, not the tiny bird inside. Next time you look closely at some sparrow by the path or a robin on the lawn or those blackbirds at Kelly's, try to envision what the body of the bird actually is inside its feathers. Chickens are easier to pluck visually. Here is a splendid rooster. Admire its magnificent plumage, but now envision the puny bird inside. And when it comes to shockingly bare, you needn't depend on your imagination. Here are chickens that are actually bred to lack feathers. This photo have all cringed, almost in embarrassment. The professor disrobed. So what we see in the garden are birds with big overcoats on and with their navigational feathers spread out like a plane's wings and tail around froggy pilots. No wonder then songbirds weigh so little. They are little, abruptly little inside their downy parkas. Tomorrow, take a few moments to look hard at a few sparrows and try to imagine the little birds inside their big parkas. Finally, I'd like to turn now to some surprises not inside birds' parkas, but inside their songs. As I said earlier, small birds like kinglets and chickadees and wrens and sparrows, so familiar to us in some ways, seem to live at a much faster clip than we do. And they seem to take their surroundings in much more quickly than we do. It is that speed of perception that I want to examine now. We ourselves can see a very quick image, but when images go by faster than 20 a second, we see a blur. To a cat or a canary, whose visual moments are much quicker than ours, a movie, with its stream of frames at 24 per second, must be an interminable slideshow, static image by image. As with our eyes, so also with our ears, we can hear a very quick sound, a mere tap. But when sounds are repeated very quickly, they flow together into an aural blur. A burry whine may, in fact, be a very fast cascade of intricacies. Of course, we can only infer what a bird hears compared to us. But we can wonder why a bird would sing, and bird song is a sexual display, would sing what others cannot hear, what other birds of its kind cannot hear. With immense thanks to Craig Hobbs in our digital arts labs for his patience and skill in preparing them, I'd like to play for you just 5 commercial recordings of songs of campus birds from among the scores that he has made for me. 3 of these songs strike us in the field as simple, the other 2 as complex. Following each song, as we hear it in nature, he slowed it to 1/4 speed so we can hear it with our own slow ears to hear what's going on in it. And he has lowered each slow motion song 2 octaves to bring it into a more familiar range of pitches down to our own tone of voice, so to speak. First, here is a common yellow throat. A little yellow bird of wet places with a raccoon-like black mask. The bird books say it sings witchety witchety. Sure enough. And here it is, slowed to 1/4 speed and lowered 2 octaves. That's the same recording as this.
Common yellowthroat.
So witchety witchety is full of startling complexity. Next, here is a brown creeper, a bird that does in fact creep up tree trunks on campus woods like a flake of bark. You can hear them singing in a lot of the college parking lots.
Brown creeper.
And here it is at 1/4 speed and 2 octaves lower. That's this.
Brown creeper.
Again, slowing this song reveals a complexity that just goes by too fast for our ears. But I have just got to believe that it doesn't go by too fast for the other creepers who are listening to it as a sexual display. Otherwise, why sing it? And as the third example, here's here's a brown creeper, that one there, right? And then there's the kinglet again, Heinrich's little bird.
Brown, golden-crowned kinglet.
And here it is altered like the others. I just don't believe it, but here it is again. And this is what we hear. Because we hear so slowly. These slowed songs are what we would hear if we could hear songs just 4 times as fast as we actually do. The kinglet, fast-paced and hot-blooded little bird that it is, weighs about a 10,000th of me. It is scarcely a wild speculation, I think, that it takes in sounds, just as it makes them, much more than 4 times quicker than I do mine. If it does, it hears its own song's complexities and probably lots of other subtleties that we miss. Now let's listen to 2 complex songs. Here is a purple finch, which is also a bird widespread on the campus here. I think my boombox may be reaching its...
Purple finch.
And here it is at quarter speed and so on. It seems to me that that's what the bird hears. And finally, here's a common resident of the upper campus in the summer, a Swainson's thrush.
Swainson's thrush.
And here it is, lowered a bit more than the others because its delicious complexity, it seems to me, invites our even more deliberate savoring. That is
Swainson's Thrush.
that's this. David Grimes, the songwriter from Alaska, comes through town from time to time. We've listened to these in amazement together. And he says, you know, of course, it sounds like a humpback whale, that thrush. In a way, it does. So one of the things that Craig and I did was we took humpback whale songs, which are hard to get, that don't have a lot of eco music in the background, but you can find them. And we sped it up 4 times instead of slowing it to quarter, and raised it 2 octaves. And I didn't bring it, but because it doesn't, in a way, it doesn't sound like a bird. Why should it? And you would have to be that much bigger than a humpback whale to have this strange proportion to hear these things. But someone was listening to it, and she said, you know, I hear a kind of periodic pulse to that whale that you never hear because it goes by so slowly. So there are other ways to play with this once the bug bites. We've carried matters by now far beyond naming birds and keeping lists. But birding does that. It carries you from the ridiculous by way of the charming to the sublime. Still, a dilemma remains, and I think it is this. In the ordinary course of things, treks into the wilderness apart, we birders pass our days afield as spectators, as bird watchers. We are more in the grandstands, however glorious they may be, than on the bird's own playing fields, partly because we are just so much bigger and slower than the birds themselves. It's Gulliver's dilemma. We may escape into nature, as the saying goes, but we cannot escape being in nature on our own terms. Charming, sublime, words like these describe our own reactions to nature. We're back to ourselves again. Science, full as it is of explanatory power, is just one of many ways of making sense of our world. We can make sense of it in many other ways too, that, like music, are not explanatory at all, any more than love is. Charming or sublime, roadside sparrow or the night sky, nature, like art, astonishes us. When it comes to questions whose answers do start with maybe, maybe the question is, what does it mean to be astonished? The other day, alone in the Arboretum, I listened to a bird trilling. Was it a junco? Yes. And there it was, singing, I knew, a much more complicated song than I could hear, and audaciously singing it from the very top of the tallest tree. Crazily, it thrilled me, as much as when I first identified a junco 60 years ago. Memories came together at that moment in the Arboretum. What a good time I have had birdwatching since those bad boarding school days. I was, in a word, astonished. The junco did it. The little bird was my feathered Madeleine. Proust smiled. Thank you.
Questions now?
Sure.
Raise your hand and we have a mic that we can bring for the questions.
There's been a lot of information about the connection between dinosaurs and birds. And I'm wondering whether you've hypothesized at all about communication among dinosaurs in your exploration of bird song.
Now that they have garish colors, I suppose we can, but no. I go back to 1948 and dinosaurs were gone by then. I should tell you, I was playing, this is just a story aside, I was playing a piece in a little performance and it included children. I was playing part of a Bach suite for them. I played the cello. And to introduce it, I said this was the such and such Bach prelude to the third suite, the C major suite. And I said, and I looked at them, I said, I didn't know Bach personally. And no one laughed. But dinosaurs, so I see the question, and in a way it looks like a little dinosaur, a feathered dinosaur. Well, it does, but I'm not sure what to make of that. But many people have looked at that drawing and had the same reaction. It just suddenly, it was such a reptilian figure inside the parka. And I'll go with that, therapsid dinosaurs, something like that. But that's like everybody's come from Charlemagne or something. You know, just, yeah.
I was just wondering if you had any stories about the Ruby-Crowned Kinglet in particular, because it seems like when I've seen it, it's been really, really friendly and just stares right back at me and just adorable in particular and more than other birds. And I think it's one of my favorites, so I was just wondering if you had any.
Yeah, this is a little bird, something like a golden-crowned kinglet, the same side, little wren-like bird. And the males have a very intensely red crown, which they raise when they're aroused. On a Christmas count a few years ago, one of the people in my party, this was on Golf Club Road, had intensely red dyed hair. And a kinglet looked at her and raised its crown. And I was terribly impressed. So we went on. All right, now we go on a few weeks, and I'm in the Arboretum, I thought all alone. And I got a piece of red felt, and there was a Ruby-Crowned Kinglet in front of me, male. So I took this out of looked around, and I put the red felt on my head and looked at of course the bird couldn't care less. But I looked around, and there was Lois Goldfrank looking at me. So that's my association with the kinglet. Well, thank you. We'll go get, was there another question? Yes, yes. Yes, Vicki. The singing, songbirds singing in general. You can see it now with doves. The collared doves have moved in. They're all singing to each other, or the males are singing to the females. The males sing. It's sexual display. Birds call for many reasons. You heard this from me on many bird walks. Birds call in alarm or begging or flocking calls to keep a flock together, or claiming things or annoyances, all these, what we would interpret as emotional states that are expressed in calls. Calls are genetically fixed. We make calls. We laugh, we cry. These are genetic calls, human calls. Songs are different. Birds sing about sex and real estate, and they're learned. Songbirds learn, not subausine birds like flycatchers, that's genetically fixed, but the songbirds we think, robins and so on, mockingbirds, are singing as a sexual display or to claim a territory. They sing you see mockingbirds now from the most prominent places they can find, like the junco, which is a ground bird, was at the very top of a tree. And there's work recently that suggests that the part of the attraction is the song, where the song will cause females even to ovulate. It's the ultimate rock concert swoon. But the other thing is that this work in Holland and in Hungary suggests that females respond to the male taking risks. We do. And their point was, don't, just because it's anthropomorphic, don't dismiss it out of hand. Use it as a possible lead to understand what's going on there. Is it just a metaphor, or are we doing something, as so much sociobiology suggests, that birds are doing too in this case? And are they taking risks? And there they are at the top of the tree in the most risky place, exposed to predators. The question, and their work has suggested very preliminarily that yes, females are responding to males taking risks, as human beings do too. The song, whether it substitutes for fighting or what, certainly is an assertion of a social hierarchy, is an assertion of a territory, although now you hear all these golden-crowned sparrows around us singing like mad. They're not breeding here, so they're singing, but they're not singing to claim territory, but they're certainly singing sexually. So that's going on. How that works into fighting, it's hard to say. I see sparrows singing and then fighting like mad. I think you can't say it's an either or, but it certainly is an expression of a hormonal excitement that happens in the spring to horses and birds.
I was wondering if you could share with us some of your exciting bird identifications over the last several years. I'm assuming you've had those moments.
Yes, rarities. Rarities really are rare. When you've been birding a long time, you see very, very few new birds in an area that that you've never seen before. I would say that birds out of place down around Salinas River at the beach there, having 4 million shearwaters fly by at the edge of the beach, about 4 million, I figured, and that kind of thing. In the 60s and 70s, and now again with this one with the yellow garter on its right leg, the flamingos at Elkhorn. To look out in the rain and see a flamingo at Elkhorn Slough is just the most. This is exciting, and but the junco excited me. So it's the situation at the moment. It's the coming together, as I say, that to me is so exciting, and it's the sense of how that great golf score, that nobody cares about. I'm 150 yards away and I put it in the hole. Who cares? But I was thrilled. Yeah.
Okay, there are refreshments outside, and please join me in thanking Todd Newberry for an excellent lecture.